Welcome everybody to our Democracy Innovations for Better Public Meetings. This is a project that we're working on currently, and this is the first webinar in the series. And so the topic for today is to sort of introduce the project and think through overcoming challenges to build better public meetings. And so on just a little bit of housekeeping, we're going to be opening the chat and we're encouraging everybody to contribute to the discussion, share resources, share links, ask questions. And then at the end of the presentations, we're going to be opening up the space for discussion to ask questions and get a nice little conversation going. So please feel free to use the chat button. And so by way of introductions, I want to welcome, some very distinguished guests that are going to be having a conversation about the context and challenges of public meetings and some of the innovations that you can work around and implement in them. And so we have Mayor Sherelle Booker, pro tempore from Tryon, North Carolina, who's also the president of Women in Municipal Government from the National League of Cities. And Sherelle Booker is currently serves in the city of Tryon, is the third women's president from North Carolina and the first woman of color from North Carolina to serve in this leadership position. As an active member of the National League of Cities, Mayor Booker has held numerous leadership positions. She serves on the Information Technology and Communications Committee, one of NLC's 6 federal advocacy committees that work to keep Congress and federal agencies focused on issues that impact municipalities. As chair of the ITC committee in 2022, she also served on the NLC board of directors. She was elected as second vice president of WIMAGE in 2021 and became the first vice president in 2022 before assuming the presidency in 2023. She also served on the NLC's Legislative Action Committee and Small Cities Council in 2021. In addition to her role as an elected official, Mayor Booker works in full-time television broadcasting at the station's internal one-woman legal department and is licensed North Carolina Realtor. I'd like to also welcome Professor Lisa Blomgren-Amsler, Distinguished Professor, Keller Rundin Professor of Public Service. And so Lisa Amsler is Professor of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. Lisa practiced public sector labor and employment law for a decade before joining academia. Lisa currently researches dispute system design, collaborative governance, public engagement, and administrative law. From 1994 to 2006, she was the director of the U.S. Postal Service National Redress Evaluation Project on mediation and EEO complaints. In 2008, she served as President Obama's Collaborative Governance Subcommittee of the Urban Policy Committee. Its report is reflected in President Obama's executive memorandum on transparency and open government, which launched the Open Government Initiative, urging agencies to adopt practices of participatory and collaborative government. Lisa has more than 140 published works or books in law and social science. In 2019, the American Society of Public Administration gave her the Dwight Waldo Award for Distinguished Contributions to the Professional Literature of Public Administration. And in 2022, the International Association of Conflict Management recognized her newest book, Dispute System Design, Preventing, Managing, and Resolving Conflict, with its Outstanding Book Award. And last but not least, our Center Director, Matt Leiniger from the National Civic League and our newly created Center for Democracy Innovation. Matt directs the center and he leads the work in strengthening democratic infrastructure, organizing national engagement efforts, and measuring the quality of engagement and democracy. That has been one of the central figures in democracy innovation over the last 20 years. As a network builder, convener, author, commentator, researcher, and practitioner, he has helped catalyze and connect the key developments in the recent evolution of democracy. As a result of these varied experiences and roles, Matt is able to articulate a systemic analysis of citizenship and help people create more collaborative, participatory forms of democracy at a time when they are desperately needed. Matt played a leading role in the wave of democratic innovation in the 1990s and 2000s, which produced many new face-to-face processes for dialogue and deliberation, working with Everyday Democracy, then local officials and staff on the National League of Cities. We provided on-the-ground assistance to over 100 communities in 40 states. Matt described the lessons learned from the efforts to support the active citizenship in his first book, The Next Form of Democracy. So welcome, speakers, and thank you so much for joining us. So just a little bit of an overview of how the webinar is going to work. We've done the welcome and introductions. I'm going to just briefly speak for a few minutes about our project. We're going to jump into the presentations, and then we're going to lead right into the discussion. So just a little bit about our project. So a little bit about our project is that we're working under the National League of Cities, the National Civic League, and the Center for Democracy Innovation, which is housed out of the Civic League. And this project is funded by the AAA ICDR Foundation. So the Center for Democracy Innovation, its mission is to understand, test, and disseminate innovations that can make democracy more participatory, equitable, and productive. And the Civic League was founded in 1894 by a respected group, including Theodore Roosevelt. The Civic League applies civic engagement principles through key programs like community assistance, awards and events, and research and publications. Our partners on this project are the International City County Management Association, National League of Cities, Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation, Participedia, the Kettering Foundation, Cities Fortifying Democracy, and Democracy Cities. And so they've been especially helpful for linking us and connecting us to various practitioners and communities across the United States. So just a little bit about, what are official public meetings and why official public meetings. So our project concerns official public meetings, by which we mean meetings that are open to the public, where elected and appointed officials are present and where policy decisions are being made. And we take this definition specifically from our own National Civic League's Model City Charter, 9th edition. The link provided here is for those interested in learning more about how hundreds of cities guide their charter language and governance structure. There are a couple of good reasons for us to focus on public meetings, and one of them is that many official meetings struggle with a variety of issues, notably attendance, timing, accessibility, inclusion of diverse voices, incivility, authentic public input, among others. So a lot of these issues arise because of the vestiges of old forms of governance that have remained in place for a long time, despite the need to innovate and adjust to meet current decision-making needs. This design challenge exists in a mixture of political reticence to make changes, or unknowing about the extent to which legally any changes can be made, and alternatives that exist to make processes more democratic, participatory, innovative, and efficient. The second reason that we focus on official public meetings is that much of the practitioner and engagement work that's interested in this space, especially participation and deliberation, has focused energy on what happens beyond official decision-making process. So here we find impressive work being done at neighborhood, county, and city levels, and such work provides inspiration for us. But at the same time, one of the largest critiques of this work, that specifically participatory forms of engagement, are that they are divested from political power. So here we take an opportunity in this project to make an intervention in an existing system of governance with the backing of political will, working directly with elected officials, and to seek to make adjustments through community engaged research. So one of the, to sort of build on that, the challenges, and we see a lot of these, the difficulties with public meetings, especially if they're poorly designed. And a lot of the way that a lot of these meetings operate, they have a tendency to lower public trust and confidence in the government. It also increases frustration and stress for public officials and staff. And it can even worsen inequities because meeting participants are not representative of the communities most affected by policies. And on the other hand, there are those, within on the government side that notice that some of the challenges are with the way the formats are, that they lead to certain types of incivility and challenges with discourse. So better public meetings can actually, exist and operate. And one of the ways that we can do this is think through the proven tools and practices that can ensure civil, productive dialogue. And these practices can be adopted as part of official public meetings. And here the goal is, to think about maintaining or creating public satisfaction within these spaces, and measure the sort of satisfaction through digital tools. And so, speaking of those, because this is a portion of this project is very much research oriented, we have two sort of tools that we're going to be utilizing with 3 pilot communities in the across the United States to sort of build this project. And one is what we call a civic engagement scorecard. Basically, it's housed on the Alchemer platform. It's quantitative approach on measuring public opinion on official meetings. And so the way that we're going to be doing this is considering it more like a 2-minute, 90-second to 2-minute approach that's going to be used while at a public meeting, and to measure public input and to see opportunities potentially to change from a quantitative level. And then from a qualitative point of view, we have what we call a civic infrastructure scan. And so this is something that Matt Laniger has been working at Public Agenda, that's been deployed in 3 other places so far. And basically what we're going to be doing is a catered strategy of qualitative interviews with members of within a community, including government staff and community leaders and neighborhood associations, and from their stakeholder dialogues to sort of develop a plan to implement public meeting changes or alterations. And this is going to run from June all the way up until till next April, May. And so there's a lot of space in between for us to do the research and to make some sort of iterations within public meeting spaces within our pilot communities. So with all that being said, I want to turn to the main focus of this webinar, which is our presentations. And so I'm going to ask and start with Mayor Booker. Floor is yours to speak a little bit about the context in Tryon and Polk County.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for taking this time to spend with us. I know you're very busy. Just want to give you a quick overview of how small we are, how tiny we are. And we still have issues, no matter your size of your city. So Polk County, North Carolina is the 5th smallest county in North Carolina. We have 100 counties in North Carolina, and we're the 5th smallest, and we are 92% rural. Polk County as a whole has a little less than 20,000 residents, and we have 6 townships, of which Tryon, North Carolina is the largest. Our municipality is the largest, and we're only at about 1,600. That's within city limits. Again, that's 1,600. And just a quick little blurb that I want to put out there just for our city. We are the birthplace of songstress Miss Nina Simone, and we're very proud of that. But as far as concerns about safety in our public meetings, I have 3 distinct experiences, and I'd like to share with you. On the county level, at one point, about 2015-ish maybe, we have a huge lot of land, and then the International Equestrian Center was moving in, and so they were purchasing this land, and they were purchasing land from homeowners who would sell it, But the problem was the land was not zoned and didn't have any restrictions. So I decided that I would start going to the county meetings myself just to see what was going to happen with the land, on the land, and how this was going to progress. So during the meetings, eventually people didn't like the equestrian center coming. They didn't like buildings being built on their rural lands, and it just became so out of hand that at one point I said I felt a little threatened. So I just stopped going to the meetings and tried to keep up with what was going on with the land and with that project, which is now for our area is very welcomed. And the Equestrian Center itself, it hosted the 2018 FEI World Equestrian Games. This is the second time that the games have been here in the United States. So after all of the things that went on during the meetings and people being so out of control per se, some good things have come out of that. And we did have police patrol in our county buildings that were more alert than they had been, and more of them than that have been. Another example is these attacks or uncivil attacks don't always happen within your meetings or your board meetings. Sometimes they're outside of that. So for instance, my mayor wanted me to see a plot of land that he had bought in a particular neighborhood, and he only wanted to plant sunflower seeds on it. And the neighborhood was not pleased with that for several reasons. So I went out with him on a Saturday just to see the land, and it was pretty awful. I didn't feel threatened because you know most of your constituents when you're in a small area, but it was not pleasant. And I was really shocked at the way that our community acted, even with in the walls of our meetings. And the third and final example that I want to get, last year as Women in Municipal Government, we had our conference in Sacramento, California. And there was a young lady that stood up and said that she always felt threatened in her meetings. She didn't feel like she had protection from her police department or her board. And she felt a threat for her life and her son's life. And so she asked me how I felt about that. I feel, for me personally, I felt like my board would take up for me, my policemen would show protection for me, and then I have a certain amount of me that I think that I can handle myself well, and with the amount of protection that I need for myself. It's really an attitude in the way that you act with one another. So this year, I am president of Women in Municipal Government, and I'm going to have my conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's in August. And the incident in Sacramento made me think that, we're going to address that during my presidency and during my conference. So this year, I plan to have a session with police women in their police uniform and allow them to address incivility in how they normally handle their situations. And these policemen, I expect to have from different parts of the United States. Of course, the National League of Cities covers the United States, not just North Carolina, where I'm from. So I'm excited about having just a session with just police women. I'm excited about that. And so this is what I expect when it comes to incivility in our meetings. I know that our constituents, they want to be heard. I myself, I'm very accessible. You can reach me through email. Everyone has my cell phone number. That would be public anyway. When you're a realtor, your phone number is public. But even if it wasn't, they have my phone numbers. And my preference for me and my constituents, when they want to have a conversation with me one-on-one, my preference is to meet them in person. I will go all out of my way to meet someone in person, and then consider the phone, and then of course email or after that. And the thing that I really want to end with is that we are public servants, and the reason why we have these positions is that we want our constituents to feel just as safe as we do. So I think it should be reciprocal. In other words, be civil when you're in these meetings. If you're addressing me in a meeting, I demand that you're civil. So, and I think that if you can be angry and yet still you can be civil. So if we get someone that's a little out of hand, normally I just kind of give them a look like, we're not going to have this conversation if you can't be civil or, at a certain amount of maturity. So, as far as civility and our safety in meetings, personally, I wouldn't want to resort to having to have doors open in the back of me where I have to escape, as some of these stories you've heard nationally. I personally don't feel that kind of threat either in my small town or in my small county. But I'll leave you with that, that even if you're small, you still have these issues of where you can feel not so safe. And I yield my time.
Thanks so much. We'll turn to questions after. If you have any, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Now we'll turn to Lisa Amsler. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It is a joy to be here, to be able to have this discussion and share this information with so many people. The work of the National Civic League and the work of this project is very important. I am a lawyer by training. I practiced law for a decade representing school boards and municipalities. I had that experience of being in a public meeting where there were people slashing tires in the parking lot because they were pretty angry with the school board. So this question of how the law interacts with public engagement is something that it raises all sorts of issues. So first of all, there's this question of knowing the laws in your state. Every state is different. The primary law that may raise issues is the Sunshine Act or Open Door Law, depending on how it's called in that state. And it is the law that makes it possible for the public to attend public meetings, requires transparency, but the laws vary widely from state to state. So when I was practicing in Connecticut, Connecticut was a very strong freedom of information state. We had a Freedom of Information Commission, very strong press. And so there was a whole process for filing complaints at a state agency. I'm in Indiana now. There is no such thing in Indiana. There's an advisory human who publishes some very helpful material. But if somebody feels like the law's been violated, they have to actually go to court, which doesn't happen very often. So to find out more about your state, especially if you don't have legal research tools at hand, Ballotopedia is a great website. And what's great about it is it's got state by state information on a whole variety of topics related to public engagement in governance. So one of the issues that's come up recently in terms of public engagement and governance is this question of what can local government actually do? I mean, when the public's angry and they want change, there's this expectation that local government can make it happen. But what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is that we're almost going back in time 120 years or so. State legislatures are passing statutes that prohibit municipalities from passing ordinances on all sorts of policy issues. And Ballotopedia, again, has policy pages that are useful. But just to give you some examples, we've got states banning local ordinances on issues related to climate change. So for example, in Colorado, you cannot pass an ordinance locally that prohibits fracking in your county. In New York, you cannot pass an ordinance locally that authorizes fracking in your county. And it's all over the place. With respect to employment, Indiana has locked statewide, the legislature locked minimum wage into the federal minimum wage. Although the federal minimum wage statute, the Fair Labor Standards Act, was supposed to establish a floor, not a ceiling. It was supposed to let people adopt higher minimum wages. And so in Indiana, no municipality can pass a living wage ordinance. So you get into a public meeting, you're talking about some important policy issue that matters to your folks, and there's nothing the city council can do. And people don't realize that, and they blame big government, but they don't know which level of government really to blame. That's just a heads up. It's going to vary widely from state to state. This is happening mostly in legislatures that have Republican majorities and Republican governors, in terms of the wide majority of new preemptive statutes. So let's move down to information gap between lawyers and public engagement people. Law schools have different training from other graduate schools or undergraduate programs. And the training is accredited by the American Bar Association, but the bar exam is monitored by a different professional association, the National Council of State Bar Examiners. There is a new bar exam that's been devised, and it's different. And it has questions on it about dispute resolution and conflict that weren't there before. But courses on dispute resolution and conflict are not required either as electives or mandated courses in law schools. Many schools don't have them. Some schools have very strong programs, but when you think about public engagement, that involves facilitation skills. And those aren't, where mediation and negotiation skills may be taught as electives in law schools. Facilitation skills rarely are. Fordham has a great course, but it's come once in a while, right? So you've got your lawyers, you've got in-house lawyers and what I call outhouse lawyers. The in-house lawyers may be an employee of the city or county, your city attorney, or they may be a law firm outside hired on an hourly basis. That's what my firm was when I was practicing there. Now, depending on whether you're in-house or outhouse, you may have a different attitude to what advice you give. So an in-house lawyer's primary concern is going to be avoiding litigation, risk avoidance, which tends to mean you're more likely to say no when a mayor asks you whether you can do something. Outhouse lawyers are going to look at the law and decide, well, there's no precedent on this. The 3 times I went to the Connecticut Supreme Court, there was no case law on the issue. There was a statute, but it hadn't been interpreted. So my firm said, well, we don't know. If you want to take the risk, we can, we may end up in litigation. And so we did, and we won 2 of the 3 cases. So this question of both the kind of lawyer you have and then the attitude of engagement facilitators. I mean, these are very creative people, and they're going to think of all sorts of different ways to bring in the public's voice. And then the question is, well, that sounds good, but can we do it? And that's where it's important. Next slide, please. That's where it's important to really think about your state. So your sunshine or open door law was going to have, more likely than not, notice and agenda rules with a certain period of time that you have to post the agenda in a certain place. Now there may be requirements to post it online in addition. It may need to require the content of the meeting topics, the time, place, and manner of the meeting. There may now, all over the country, these rules are changing. There may be rules for virtual meetings now. There are changes going on right now in terms of school board meetings, where there's this question of requiring people to be allowed to make public comment, where it's not always the case in a law that public comment is required. In Indiana, 70% of the municipalities have no public comment, no 3 minutes at the microphone even, because they don't have to under the statute, and they'd rather not, right? So this question is the law silent? Which means you can have public comment, you can be all sorts of creative, it's just, it's not forbidden, right? Or Does it say you're authorized to have public comment, which encourages people to adopt policies? Or does it rarely, if ever, now increasingly at school boards, require public comment? Now, there's a difference between an official public meeting of an elected public body under these sunshine laws, and then there are all sorts of other statutes that require public hearings. Usually they're about land use. And usually these do require that the public be heard, but they're a different thing. So there's also this question of accessibility rules. It turns out that public engagement is much more accessible for all sorts of people out in rural districts who can't travel easily to the meeting, either because of transportation, public transportation, handicap issues, children at home. And it turned out in Indiana, when we did a study of this, there was much more public engagement when it was online during COVID. And so now it's become something that's more permanent for for any public meeting, and also making it possible for people to participate more and speak more. So this question of open meetings versus open hearings is important, because here's an opportunity actually for innovation. It turns out that all the various state agencies that have the power to make regulations, and the vast majority of them do in every state, generally that power would include, if you wanted to read it that way, the power to authorize and even mandate public comment and public engagement at that public state agency level. Now, if it did that, it could also, in theory, like our state health department, we did a complete scan of every statute in the health code during COVID as part of a public agenda and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation project that Matt Leininger was leading up at the time in our community. One of 6 states that had such a project. And there were statutes out the wazoo for every commission and board that was regulated by the Department of Health, including one on equity and justice in health, both in terms of race and in terms of gender. So this question of, can we push for those regulations, which would then encourage stuff to go on at the local level? That's an opportunity. Participedia.net is a resource, open access, lots of examples of great public engagement. So think about how you're going to ensure transparency if you do use public engagement in your community, and outreach, notes, recordings, public access broadcasts that people already do, but also meeting reports. And with that, I will yield the rest of my time. Hope I didn't use too much.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Mayor Booker. So the question on the table is, can you do official public meetings in ways that raise the level of civility and ensure safety, as Mayor Booker was saying, that also abide by the law, as Lisa was just explaining, and that make the meetings more participatory, equitable, and for everybody? So, of course, our answer is yes. This whole project is predicated on the fact that this answer is yes. I know a lot of you on the call have experiences, expertise that you might want to offer in addition to the questions that you've been asking, thoughts on how you've been able to do this or how you want to do it in your community or in other places. We'd love to hear those, get those in the chat as well. I want to make some general observations and then some tips, give some tips. One is that in this kind of work, a little research goes a long way. You know, especially if you're new to the community, if you are launching some new effort to get people more involved or to make the meetings better, doing a little bit of work to understand a bit of the history, more than our weaknesses in your community, understanding the ways in which your institution, or whether it's local government or a school system or a library system or a university, the ways in which they have tried and in some ways succeeded or failed to engage the public in the past. That's an important thing to understand some of the weaknesses, the things that you might need to do a better job, and also some of the assets that may be out there that you're not necessarily fully aware of. There could be a library that's very open and wanting to engage more people, and it is already kind of a welcoming place for a wide variety of people in the community. There could be a youth leadership project that you might want to tap into and partner with. There could be faith leaders who want to be helpful. So understanding some of that context more than you do already can certainly be helpful. Some of the keys about kind of strengthening those relationships with community organizations, with leaders in the community, you're hoping that they will not just represent people in their networks, but actually engage them directly as much as possible. And that's a shift, because a lot of people don't have that mindset. They think of themselves as leaders who represent others, and you're trying to kind of get them to both change that mindset, offering them some tools and tricks and practices that can help them engage other people directly. In terms of the collaborations of their institutions, but one of the things that seems to be true in most places is a lack of collaboration between school systems, local governments, county governments, library systems, all these different sorts of institutions. And it's a real shame, because the more that those groups collaborate, the more efficient, more effective, more equitable participation can be, because they can attract a larger number of people. They can kind of offer a range of things that people are interested in. They can simply share tips and you know, how to engage the public. And so more of that kind of collaboration at all these levels would be really helpful. One thing that I think is worth thinking about is what is actually working, and asking people, elected officials, others, you know, like Mayor Booker, what is working. And often what you will hear, like Mayor Booker was saying, is, you know, the one-on-one conversations, you know, the conversations in the grocery store, small group sorts of things. You know, those are the things that elected officials enjoy most, out of that they feel heard, their constituents feel heard. And so some of what you're really trying to do is kind of, and you can't do this, you know, fully, but taking some of those basic principles of those sorts of successful, more informal kinds of engagement and try to introduce some elements of that into official public meetings. Obviously, you can have complementary activities before, during, and after the meetings. I'll talk more about those in a second. But then also, I think part of the question here is, yes, you're trying to make official public meetings successful, and how can you do that is an important question, and it is nested within a bigger question, which is, what is your overall strategy for strengthening the relationship between citizens and institutions in your community? What kind of local democracy do you want, and how will the official public meetings fit into? So then the tips, a couple different, you know, types of things. One, in terms of getting a broader set of people to these meetings, understanding that you need proactive network-based recruitment. So, which is a fancy way of saying that invite other people they already know. That is why they will come to something, whether it's an actual physical meeting in a city hall or wherever, or it's an online experience, or it's in a church basement or a neighborhood center. They're not going to come generally unless somebody they know asks them to do so. So having it in the paper, having it online, having it, you know, on social media, those are all wonderful supplementary sorts of things. But really what you need to do if you really want a diverse, large turnout is to work with those other kinds of leaders in your community, traditional, non-traditional leaders, and get them to kind of work their network of people and get people that they already know to come. Inside the meeting also, whether it's as a kind of a, some communities have done this as a kind of a meeting, which is like a pre-meeting right before the official meeting, in the context of the official meeting, getting people together in smaller groups, in pairs, in small facilitated conversations. And again, this is kind of mimicking what seems to be working, the more informal sorts of things. You can have that kind of thing happen in or next to official public meetings, and it often really lowers the temperature, the level of tension. It gets people more informed. They have a chance to ask questions. They can understand perhaps some of the kinds of things that Lisa was talking about as far as state preemption and so forth. You know, having that sort of more informal part of things, and then rather than having people kind of parade up to a microphone, you can use technology like instant polling and or breakouts, but you can kind of harvest some of the ideas, the questions that come from those groups, rather than kind of asking people to come up and take three minutes of the mic. It's often a much more informed, civil, deliberative way of getting people involved in a conversation. Sometimes you can, most public meetings these days are televised and cable access. You can also be using technology to allow people to ask questions or give comments kind of as a side feed to the meeting as it's going on in the chamber. So you've got people who are outside the meeting who are able to participate. Austin, Texas has been a leader of that for some time, but other communities do it too. Outside the meeting, there's all kinds of things you can be doing. The conversations, you can have survey panels where people are basically signing up to kind of receive on a regular basis questions from their institution about public policy, things that they're interested in, how they're feeling about particular sorts of things. The advantage of that is you've kind of recruited them once, they've said yes, you know their demographics, so you know how representative they are, and you can be feeding this group of people with questions that you want answers to on over time, and continually invite people to join that group on over time, so that that set of people who are engaged in that way gets bigger and bigger. You can also be having more informal gatherings. That meet and eat is a kind of a shorthand for this, but basically situations where people are getting together in churches, in neighborhood centers, in libraries to kind of talk about public issues. You can go bring some of the questions, some of the information you want people to absorb in those other kinds of satellite kinds of gatherings, and kind of connect those more to your official meetings. You can be using technology in the form of ideation platforms and other kinds of processes where people can actually, brainstorm things that they think that city council or school board should be focused on or should be thinking about, and so forth. And those sorts of platforms allow people to rank and comment on each other's ideas. And then you can use technologies that are very accessible, such as texting, to get questions and information out to people in ways that they can actually discuss it themselves and report back on what they think in ways that are much more aggregatable and kind of presentable to the body as a ways of getting kind of participation of people who don't necessarily want to come to City Hall or to the library or some other kind of official setting. Let me stop there and see, Nick, what you got as far as questions and comments in the chat.
Great. Thanks everyone for the great conversation and the presentations. So I'll encourage everybody to, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'm just going to make my way through some of these and put them out to the panelists. So one question here is, do you think that online options can act as a replacement for in-person town halls? Would bringing a citizen jury or a representative sample to engage on issues be something that could help deal with safety concerns of elected officials?
I can jump in on that, unless Mayor or Lisa, you want to. I mean, one thing I think I would say is that sessions and representative sample sorts of processes, and by that what is meant is kind of things where you're actually kind of randomly selecting people from the community process where they're going to learn about a decision or an issue and kind of give some thoughts and recommendations for an elected body or for the community as a whole. Both of those sorts of things are great complements to the official in-person sorts of public meetings. They're not a replacement, but they're certainly complements for it. The online obviously allows people to participate who don't want to participate face to face. The representative sample sorts of things can kind of help people understand the kind of concerns or questions that may be coming from the community about something, and obviously can model kind of the civility and the deliberation that you want to see happen in official public meetings and other sorts of things. So I think they're great complements. They're not necessarily replacements.
Well, I'd like to say just a couple of things about that.
Yeah.
First one, we prefer that people actually show up in person, or you're just speaking to an empty room. Sometimes, just like we all do when we're on a Zoom, we may not be paying attention, we may be doing other things. So if you're going to get any benefit, for me, it's worth coming to the meetings. And as far as COVID and being on Zoom, our board never had to go depend just on Zoom. We were in person the whole time. So pretty much our little town didn't shut down. Actually, nothing that I do in life during COVID shut down. So I'm not used. I've done a lot of Zoom, but I do prefer that my constituents are there in front because you can get your paperwork. Of course, you can go online and get the reports and so on and so forth. But if you are there, you have input. We can have input, and We're not the smart ones in the room. That's why we have constituents. That's why I call myself a public servant. So if it's any way that I can serve you, let me know. And if you're there with the entire board, we all can have input on that. So that's what I have to say about that particular subject.
Great, thanks for that. Lisa, I have a quick question for you. Considering that we're seeing these challenges with official public meetings at the local level, is it as simple as having the state level effectively alter how democracy operates in public meetings through top-down legislation?
Top-down legislation can be helpful. For example, President Obama's executive memorandum on transparent and open government basically required every federal agency to adopt policies related to collaborative governance and made for a whole bunch of creative activity in trying new models across the federal government. Unfortunately, it was a memorandum. It wasn't a statute, and so it didn't persist into the next administration. So yes, a statute authorizing things gives people shelter, gives lawyers shelter, and saying, yeah, you can do that. Authorizing is not the same as mandating, but it's a great first step. And that's what happened first federally with the Administrative Dispute Resolution Act on using all forms of dispute resolution. And then it was adopted state, that kind of language was adopted state by state, first by Florida and Texas. So the short answer is yes, that would be helpful, but that's not the only way in if you have a state legislature that may not want to. State legislatures may be more receptive now, regardless of political majority, because of what's going on with the school board meetings and the dialogue over what's appropriate and not appropriate in curriculum.
Great.
I remember you
there's
saying, just to add on to that, I mean, what you're saying, Lisa, also part of the difficulty with many of the laws governing public participation is that public participation and its other kinds of term, public engagement, those are rarely defined, at least not very well. So that, and that part of the kind of the virtue of those sorts of authorizing, ordinance clarify, here's what we mean by good public engagement in our community. It has these 5 attributes or use these sorts of practices, and that definition then can have a cascading effect on other sorts of practices through the other laws and policies and ordinances that communities use.
Yes, but even having the words public engagement or public participation without defining them, but just expressly authorizing it would be, and we could define it in regulations adopted by your Freedom of Information Commission pursuant to the statute. So, for example, in Indiana, there's no express authorization for any agency to use negotiated rulemaking, but the state Supreme Court in its regulations at the Supreme Court level talked expressly about negotiated rulemaking. So everybody infers authority to do it.
And some of that language is about engagement and equity is in this 9th edition of the Model City Charter, which had been upheld by the Civic League for over 100 years as the kind of legal template for the relationship between citizens and government. And this 9th edition, which just came out last year, is the first to uphold engagement and core priorities of local governance. And so some of the kinds of things that might be helpful, and if you're in a community basis, people can be using that and directing city managers, city attorneys, elected officials to that document is something that can be helpful as a guide for figuring out what should the best legal framework be for us for governing good public engagement.
Great. Going to the chat, we have another question here. One problem being asked, one problem I run into as a planner facilitating public engagement is that open public meetings are very unrepresentative of the population, but invited stakeholder meetings that try to get good representation are perceived as less valid because they are not open to everyone. I wonder if maybe we might speak a little bit of that sort of differentiation, plus also questions of representation.
Matt, may I talk about Community Voices for Health in Monroe County?
Sure.
So this project funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we were able at the local level to have collaboration between the public, private, and nonprofit sectors and the general public. It requires effort, it requires funding, but to go out and actually specifically invite in underrepresented voices in arenas that are not initially official public meetings, but are dialogue and deliberation sessions. So specifically trying to elevate underserved community voices in collaboration with leaders in the community, so that you would get a more representative ideas. The ideas are different. So, for example, when we brought into these kinds of meetings as a first step, it turns out when you're doing a community health improvement plan through your health department, that's going to get all those voices of people. We found out that more than half of them had graduate degrees, the people who filled out surveys for that. So it was, and they were higher income. I mean, that just wasn't representative of the community at all. And then when you invite people in, what these, and we're talking about representative samples based on race and color and gender and ability or disability, the things that people were talking about, the subjects they were talking about that needed to be put in the community health improvement plan were different. I mean, for example, transportation, access to care, not simply convenience. So what happened from that is the public elected public officials did become involved in advisory council, and that advisory council, which is representative of all different components of the community, has about 20 people in it, has now evolved into the community, the Monroe County Equity Council. And it is an advisory body that is going to be elevating issues that are more representative of voices in the community with regularity to the elected officials. So it's a new kind of infrastructure. Matt, do you want to add to that?
No, that's terrific.
I'd like to add something.
Yeah.
My preference would be that every community send at least one person, to a meeting. We all have at least 12 meetings. So one family or one family member could come to this meeting, another family member maybe, but we actually have a community that we meet with them 4 times a year. So it's 2 council members, the town manager, the police department, fire department, so on and so forth. We actually go out into the community and sit with them at the table. So that's the way we do it.
Cool.
That's a good segue into one of the questions here that, and maybe I'll put this to you, Mayor Booker, is are there somewhere that you can see some of these examples of the sort of formats of these informal meetings that you mentioned? Are they currently being used in your awareness, maybe by other elected officials?
Well, I personally don't know of any other council that actually goes out into the community, and the one that I just said, I don't know any that actually goes out. It's almost like they have to come to the council meetings, and sometimes you have to meet people where they are. So I think that each council, each community, each town is different. And some of the things that Lisa was talking about may not work even in a region in a particular of the United States. So my thing is meet people where they are and be civil with each other. That's on both sides. And find out what works best for your constituents, because just like the community that we go to personally, not any of the other communities come out to that meeting. And I just wish we would be more of a tight-knit ball there, that all the communities cared about each community and everyone cared about everyone, but we know that's not going to happen. So as a council, no matter where you are, I suggest that you work in a way that it benefits all the people, even if you have to go out and sit at the table with them.
Great. So we got a question here for Matt. Given the mission of your new center, do you think it might be possible to compile a list of best practices and other innovations for public meetings that could be shared nationwide? I hear many complaints in my city about the 3-minute open mic. People feel they are ignored and it's a waste of their time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agreed. I mean, the 3 minutes sort of mic process doesn't seem to work for anyone, and it continually surprises me how many people hate that, whether they're staff or electeds or citizens, and yet communities keep doing it. Mine who did a manual for better engagement in the city of Toronto. The title of the manual is "We've Got to Stop Meeting Like This." I think this is true in lots of places. In terms of the resources question, yeah, so part of this process, part of the project that we're engaged in now, with the support of AAA ICDR Foundation, we'll be producing, both collecting and creating new ones, and so we'll be putting these out and sharing them at conferences and social media and all sorts of things. So this will be a source of kind of information, hopefully helpful tips for people. However, there's also lots of stuff out there right now. I mean, so if you look at the National Civic League website, there's a really nice resources page, which has a whole bunch of things on it. One of them is a document called Making Participation Legal that Lisa and I worked on years ago, which includes a model ordinance and lots of good practices for better engagement. Participedia, which is also came up earlier, that's a participedia.net, is a wonderful online resource for people who want to do better engagement. I wrote a book a couple years ago with Tina Dabachi, 21st Century Democracy. I'll put the link to that in the chat. That's another compendium of good practices. So there's plenty of things, not only the practices and tips themselves, but also some stories from communities that have used them. And we're happy to email us. We're happy to kind of send you more that might be kind of more customized to your community or the issue you're working on and so forth.
Yeah,
May I add to that?
Yeah.
Our meetings, we do not put a cap on the limit that you can speak. But when we think you've made your point, the mayor will, let you know we think we have it. In the county, you get 5 minutes, and if you want to talk about every subject on the agenda, you get 5 minutes. The same person can talk all night long, on every subject. So, like I said, it depends on where you are and what your board consists of. That 3 minutes or 5 minutes may not even come into play. And I like the fact that our constituents can talk until they feel like they have been heard.
It's great. So we're coming up on time here, but I just want to note one of the links that we circulated in there is about the Monroe County Voices for Health. That's an excellent resource. That's a really interesting project that has a toolkit for how to run a civic infrastructure scan and engage in an equitable level. So that's definitely worth checking out. There are some other interesting conversations that are happening in the chat, but we are at time. I want to be mindful of the hour here, but just to recognize that as the project unfolds, and we'll say that we're going to be writing a little bit about this, and there's a couple opportunities that we're going to be considering, potentially a special entry series on Participedia, dispatches from the field as we work with pilot communities. We're going to have another webinar that has a conversation with our pilot community members on how these processes are unfolding. And so we'll keep in mind some of these questions that are asked in the chat, in thinking about, some of the issues of the specifics of how to adjust public meetings. And so things that we'll consider going forward. And you might want to subscribe to our newsletter, where we're actually going to be doing a little bit of some of this writing and updates, and check our website as it going forward. And by all means, feel free to email me at any point with any questions, and I'm happy to circulate or continue this conversation forward. So on that note, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us, and for our panelists for having a conversation. And thank you so much.